Welcome everyone. We're just going to run through our training today, which is on the dialogue model. This is just a very, very short film clip I like to play. It gives you an illustration of some of the stuff that we discussed today. So some of you might have seen this footage before. And away we go.
I don't think you guys understand it or will ever understand it.
We didn't believe you, and I'm so sorry, mate. You are a bloody hero. Go on. You live with a bad name.
Alright, so what we saw there was good old Normie Rowe and Ron Casey having a bit of an altercation on national TV. One of the things you would have picked up in that footage was just how quickly, Normie's talking quite calmly, and then all of a sudden his whole persona changes, all because of what Ron said to him. So something's triggered and he's gone down a certain path. So in this case, we're focusing on why some of those things happen and why when we have relationships with people at work and that kind of stuff, how those things can have an effect on how interchange takes place. So basically the purpose of today is to develop a self-awareness of your own behaviour and that of others, and it's especially under why we get defensive or aggressive. And in a work context, more around giving and receiving negative feedback. It's one of the things we don't do very well. It's also aimed at teaching you how to improve conversation skills and helping groups to help each other to start addressing issues before they become bigger problems. One of the things that we tend to do is something will happen and we just let it fester, we don't say anything about it or do anything about it. And this is one of the reasons we do that. And the overall purpose is to help the individual to improve your own skills, which then helps the team. So if you're working with a team of people, we want to try and help you to be able to interact well and also do things better as a team going forward. And developing a proactive sort of culture rather than just one that emerges and by osmosis over time. Okay, now this is working. There it is. Alright, very, very quick lesson on brain physiology. So what you'll see here is a very big blue part, which is the cerebral cortex, and then there's a small part of this red part here. It's not that whole red bit, but a small part of that called the amygdala. So I'll refer to this part as blue brain for obvious reasons, and the other one red brain, again for obvious reasons, but it's also, we use those terms because it comes to mind very easily and people remember it. So, the cerebral cortex, as I said, blue brain, as you can see, a particularly big part of the brain. It's responsible for the higher mental functions, general movements, perception and behavioural reactions. I'll go into a bit more detail about what that exactly looks like. The next part is the red brain or amygdala, which is responsible for emotional responses, including fight or flight. Most people would have heard of fight or flight in the sense of, animals' natural instincts to get the hell out of dodge if they're under any kind of danger, or to stay and actually have a fight to overcome the danger. So I'll refer to it as red brain, blue brain from here on in. That's the lesson done around the physiology side. So if we focus specifically on blue brain, it's the reflective part of the brain. You can think about what you did yesterday, you can think about how I could do the task better that I did another time, all that kind of stuff, so you can actually think back, and this is the part of the brain that uses that. It's linked to where we do our conscious thinking and analysing, so you consciously think, okay, what could I have done differently, and it's a conscious thought. I want to really think about this, and I'm trying to overcome a problem, I'm consciously thinking about it. It involves our imagination, creativity and labels of our emotional state. So if I see that you're looking bored, I can label it, and part of that comes around this, what emotional state that person's in, or when I think I'm a bit stressed today, I'm a bit angry, all that kind of stuff. Obviously imagination and creativity is something, if you think about it, it's a future state. You might think of something and you think, Picasso when he first started out might have thought about his paintings and then it became reality and that kind of stuff. So they use this kind of part of the brain as well. This is an important part. The blue brain requires a lot of blood to function. I'll explain that a bit more in a sec. Obviously its sheer size clearly dominates in terms of what it requires, but it's also important later on to understand that a bit. One of the crucial parts is you can't be in a blue brain and red brain state at the same time. So that's quite important that one will override the other one, and they work sort of together sometimes, but they don't work at the same time. this is another important one. It's not fully functional until adulthood. Now, blue brain is generally seen as the part that is the calming part. You're consciously overcoming, I'm all angry, I count to 10, I think logically, and that kind of stuff, and I calm myself down. What tends to happen is that's not fully functional until you're an adult. So you find, if you look at crime statistics, for example, that the crimes that involve people doing silly things on the spur of the moment, crimes of passion and that kind of stuff, tend to be a certain age group, and they don't tend to be the older people. So the reason for it is partly to do with this. Also, drinking of alcohol. When you're drinking alcohol, alcohol actually dumbs this part of the senses down, so you're less likely to override using this. So if you're already young and it's not fully formed, and you're drinking, it all adds up to a mix of different behaviour, let's put it that way. Okay, in terms of red brain, it's linked with fear, which is a primary emotion. We all know what fear is. And the secondary emotion is anger. These two live hand in hand. So if you think of little dogs, they call them, yappies instead, fear biters. Generally, they'll attack because they're actually in a state of fear, because they think, I'm only little, if anyone does me, so they're really aggressive. They overcome the aggression because they're so fearful. So that's how that works in that instinctive way for them. It's responsible for the emotional component of a memory. So when you think of an emotional component of a memory, people will reflect on things that have happened to them many years ago. Like, my daughter recently went to one of those Holocaust museums, and there was a person there talking. They were, obviously an elderly person. But when this stuff had happened to them when they were very, very young, very emotional, that kind of stuff, they were reflecting back on what had happened. And what obviously happens from there is the person gets very emotional and feels the same way they do. And the body actually has the same responses as if it happened yesterday. It's very vivid for people. It's highly emotional. Important to remember that it's stored in this part of the brain. What it also does is it activates the body's response to danger. So there's a number of things that happen with that, and I'll explain them in a sec. It's also involved in emotional learning. Now, emotional learning doesn't mean it has to be something that you've experienced yourself. You can see someone else experience it. A good example is if you're watching a movie, I'm going to use a girly term, I suppose, a girly movie, which is highly emotional. You might see someone else in a state that there's sadness attached to it, and you feel that way. So you actually take on the feeling and you can experience it vicariously. Memories of emotional experiences are imprinted in synapses in this area. So you don't normally think of your thoughts or your memories of actually leaving something behind, but they do. So basically, one nice way to put it is, every time you have that thought, there's a little thread left behind. So if you do the same thing over and over and over, you tend to form like a bundle, like a number of them, of lots of little strands, and that's where habits are formed. So the brain's all designed to try and minimise its energy. So if you think of yourself when you're first learning to drive, you're thinking of lots of different things. It's actually tiring because you have to think about it. But as you get better at driving and more experience, you don't even think about it. I drive home to talk and I don't even think about the driving. That's because what's happening, it becomes routine. Yeah. So the more times I've done it, my brain actually helps me do this quicker now and think of it less consciously, and becomes more unconscious. So we do this stuff. What you find is people that get angry very quickly. There's sometimes a pattern they call them. They might say they're Irish, or they're got a hair trigger, and they're always getting angry, that kind of stuff. And part of that is because if their response is to get angry consistently, they build up a habit, and automatically it'll be their default position. They're always more angry than if they're not angry. So you can actually, the amygdala can actually grow in size by how often you access it, just like any other muscle kind of thing. If you use it a lot, it gets bigger, and then it's also harder to overcome if it's a bad thing for you. Now, red brain is designed to basically work on a 10 or 15 minute burst. It is designed to keep you out of harm's way, but not consistently long patterns of periods. It's supposed to get you the hell out of there, 10-minute sprint or whatever. Like, you can't run at the same speed like Forrest Gump for hours on end, because it is very taxing. It's to get you the hell out of there, put a couple of 100 metres between you and danger, and then you have a rest. That's how it should work.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things, some studies were done, and they found that the blue brain route is necessary for consciously identifying something, and red brain route only needs bits of information to automatically trigger. That is underlined automatically because it is an automatic response and it triggers a fear response. The example I like to use is a dog behind the gate. You're walking down the street, beautiful summer's day, thinking about what you do on the weekend or whatever, and all of a sudden, you know, there's a dog barks other side of the gate, you didn't know was there. A few things happen all at once. One, you jump sideways, you get to there, kick this thing, whatever it may be, you know. So red brain kicks in here, it's unconscious, it just happens. You go, oh, this is what red brain thinks is happening, right? Then you actually look over and you see this little baby there, and you go, oh no, it's only a little dog, he's no harm to me. This is blue brain now kicking. Now you're consciously looking at this information. Whereas before it was just instinctive, get me the hell out, I'll just react as if I'm in danger. Then I'll look at, oh no, I'm not in any danger. Blue brain kicks in and now you start to talk yourself out, it's not a problem. Having said that, if that first dog was actually coming through the fence, red brain would go, get the hell out of here, or get a fake, fence paling and whack this thing over the head or whatever, and your instinct would kick in again and would go back to a red brain response, which is just to get you the hell out of dodge. Okay. In terms of the process, so this bit's important here. You have an environmental or a psychological stimulus. Something actually happens now. An environmental stimulus would be an actual dog or a snake or a spider or something physically you can put your hand on. In terms of whether to identify that as a threat. The psychological one's a lot more difficult because it can be anything. You get cyberbullying, people put things online saying, oh, I think you're a tool or whatever. I read that and then I feel a certain way. That's a psychological, it's not a threat to me, but it's affecting my thoughts and how I feel about it and all that kind of stuff, right? So it doesn't matter what's triggering it, but something triggers it. Sometimes it could be something very real, and sometimes it could be something that I've made up. What was that over there? I'm on high alert or something. I'm looking for something that's making me, arousing me more. I'm just looking for things that make me angry, and sometimes that can happen. So over here, this is unconscious. So something happens, environmental or psychological, and automatically this might get triggered. If there's even a glimmer of a threat to me in it, like I said, just need little bits of information. If there's a glimmer of it in there, I'll pick it up and I'll automatically go down the path of a red process. When I go down this path, a few things happen automatically I have no control of. So one, it starts the body's response to danger. So what happens is adrenaline is released, that goes bang in your system. You've got no control of stopping that, it's just going to happen, right? Your breathing and your heart rate increases, and part of that is that you're taking in more oxygen because you're getting your blood, you need the blood in your muscles to get ready to either fight or flight. The blood rushes from the brain to those muscles, and this is where the important thing I mentioned earlier about the blue brain needing a lot of oxygen and needing a lot of blood is that when the blood rushes from your brain to the muscles, it means you've got less up there to deal with when you're in a red brain state. And what happens is fear and anger use a lot of energy. It all goes there. It's now, adrenaline's really pumping, and you just don't have any control until you maybe override it. So this is where now you're consciously doing. So this is where we have an internal discussion. We'll say, okay, so to use the dog analogy before, okay, I'm looking at this dog, he's only little, I'm actually talking to myself. We don't realise, but we actually have an internal conversation in our heads when these things happen, and we're saying now it's conscious, I'm thinking about it, only a little dog, no real worry to me, hey little fella, and that kind of stuff, right? And basically, when you have the discussion, you look back on your past experiences. Now, if I was someone who was very fearful of dogs, even from a little, as a little tack I got bitten by, I'd be fearful of even that little dog that you saw. So for me, if my past experiences were bad, I might go back into red because, oh my God, it's just a dog, any size dog will scare the crap out of me. So, whereas someone like me, I'm brought up around dogs, I look at that and we go over there packing, not the first dog, but the second dog, so that'll determine how I respond. But once you're in here, this can actually bring you back into red if it is a problem for you. How you perceive the event. Some people are fearful of really weird things, letters and all kinds of bizarre things. And
Letters.
I've heard of a guy who had in his head that someone had touched a letter and it was Jeremy, and that's how you become OCD and all that kind of stuff. So anything can trigger it, right? In that case, it's not really an environmental threat to him, but to him it is. It's very really psychologically turning into a threat for himself, and that's based on whatever past experience he had. This model here is a very basic one. So I experience something, I form a mental model, And because of my mental model, I will actually determine how I experience things in the future. So to use the example again of the little dog, if I had a bad experience as a child with a dog, my mental model is all dogs are horrible and scary. So going forward, I'm not going to really go and muck around with other people's dogs, or if anything, I'll probably distance myself from it.
Yeah.
What that also does then is probably reconfirms my mental model, because I just won't have any contact with it. But if I do see a dog, I get highly anxious, and I don't like that feeling. So to me, that's another negative experience for the same thing. It just confirms my mental model, and round I go. So one goes with the other
So
one.
you can't fix that?
I can't fix it without doing something different. Either what must happen is if there's a bad thing happening there, I either have to change my experience, so make it a positive experience. Okay, you get closer to the dog. See, this dog's not so bad, you touch him and all that kind of stuff. Or I've got to change my mental model, which, I'll watch someone else can play with the dog and think, oh, maybe it's not so bad, I'll have a go this time, and then I'll change my experience, because they have to go hand in hand, I have to change one or the other to make the other happen. So to put it in terms of, a work environment, if you've got a particularly nasty boss and your experience with them is they're not very approachable and that kind of stuff, your mental model pretty much confirms that. So you're probably going to avoid doing it, you're going to avoid having a conversation. Or you've got a person at work, you don't like what they've done in the past, so you've got, I'll go and have a chat to them. But what happens is they just go off their nana at you, so you go, uh-oh, we're doing that again, I'm going to do it. My mental model is I'm not stupid enough to go give this guy feedback about his performance when he's clearly going to bite my head off. So guess what? I avoid it.
Yeah.
That's what tends to happen. You've got managers that maybe avoid people, superintendents avoid people, whatever. So they're not prepared to take it on and work through it. Okay, this is my cue to talk about an experiment they did a few years ago where they had 5 monkeys. They put 5 monkeys in a cage and they have a ladder going up to whole heap of fruit, bananas up the top. So they put the monkeys in there, the monkeys start to go up to the fruit and bananas. First thing that happens is they get hosed with water as they get close to the fruit. Over time, the monkeys just stop going there because no one wants to get hosed. What they then do is they take one monkey out of the group, and they introduce a whole new monkey. New monkey goes, hey, bananas, goes to go up the ladder. What do you think happens?
And the monkeys say no, the other monkeys
Yeah,
say
they actually jump on him and beat him up. So over time, he doesn't want to get beaten up anymore, he doesn't go for the fruit. What they eventually do is they replace all the existing first 5 monkeys with other new monkeys, and each time they introduce the new monkey, same thing happens, the other monkeys jump on him, prevent them from going up there. Over time, all the original monkeys are replaced with 5 new ones. None of them go up to the fruit, but none of them even know why they don't go up to the fruit. So if you think of it in terms of the experience and that mental model thing that I had up before, the experience for the first 5 monkeys was, I get wet if I go near the fruit. The experience for the other 5 was, I get beaten up if I go near. The result's still the same. So culture can be exactly the same. If I'm scared and I don't want to do something, or the group around me, meld me in a certain way, and my experience forms a certain mental model, it can stay like that, and that's how culture will continue to develop. New person comes into, say, the milk shop as an example, then, and that culture is a certain way, that person will be either have to conform to how we want it to happen, or you'll probably be ostracised and not be involved. So we have to be conscious of how quickly a culture can develop, especially if you've got an entrenched one. It's really, really heartbreaking. Okay, this here is something called the dialogue model. It's not my own. It's out of a book called Crucial Conversations.